guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be showing you everything that I have learned from drawing hair over the years, and hopefully it will come to help you guys as well. So the very first thing we need to get acquainted with are the different types of hair, because for the most part all of these types of hair behave very differently, and it's very hard to create a baseline for how they behave when you're drawing them. The only thing that I can think of that ties all of these hair types together is that hair has volume, so it won't just mold itself to the head. There is a bit of a distance between the scalp and where the hair ends, and even with fine hair this is the case. Another thing that most hairs have in common is that they grow in groups, and those groups will grow in different directions. And most of the time where the directions that those groups are going are visible, so you just keep in mind where you are parting the hair and go from there. But you will see later on when we go through all of these hair types that isn't always the case. So first you really need to talk about hair types, and if you guys haven't seen Pypah's hair tutorial video, I highly recommend watching that also. It's a great tutorial. She explained how you can distinguish between the types of hair. So if you somehow found this video before hers, just go ahead and check it out. There's a lot of stuff to learn in that video. It's really great. So the first hair type I want to talk about is type 1 hair. This is just straight hair. The differences between A, B, and C is that the first one is mostly fine and doesn't hold a curl really well. 1B hair is a little bit thicker, but it holds curls really well. And 1C is kind of like the second one, except it may have a few strands that start to wave. And then the next hair types are the curly and wavy category. Pypah explained this really well, in which the number is the amount of the curls your hair has and the letter is the intensity of those curls. I won't be drawing all of these just because I don't want this to take too long, but I will be doing one of each category and then two of the type 4 hair, just because I feel like there's a lot of difference between 4A and 4C, so we're gonna be doing those and plus some different hairstyles that we normally see. So first we're gonna talk about straight hair, and so this one just falls very straight down from the scalp following gravity. So if the head will be tilted down, the hair would still fall straight to the ground regardless of the direction that the head is facing. But even straight hair isn't just gonna be straight all the way through. Sometimes there's a slight bend to them, especially towards the end. So when you're drawing interruptions, like for example it's hanging off by the shoulders, it's great to focus the waves right near where the interruption is, so it looks like the hair is heavy and it's still mostly being pulled down by the gravity. And then you can just have fun with the strands in the end, because usually, like I said, they point a different direction where they're cut, and mine I'm just making them curve slightly in. Then when you start filling out the lines, you want to start by separating them into different groups. And the reason why straight hair is so hard to draw is because the strands just start looking too uniform if you draw too many of them, and so it's best to draw them in groups, and these groups also go from different directions initially when they're starting out before they just all fall straight down. So to take another example, this one is much straighter, and I start off by drawing the general shape first, and once again make sure it's elevated a little bit from the head. And then to start the shading, I'm focusing them mainly on the tops and the bottom, because I want to keep this light. And the reason that I'm shading in the values first is because I want those lines to really show up on top, and that's really important for straight hair especially. So the bangs on her are much more curved than the rest of her hair. That's because it's much shorter. I just make sure that the curve on it is very gradual and nothing too severe. And then when I'm grouping the big strands on top, you can see how they're growing in different directions initially, but they all tend to just group together when they go lower down. I also made the ends point in different directions by groups, and then they all meet again together when we start drawing them up towards the middle. When we're filling out these lines, I'm making scratching lines like you use when you're writing check marks, and I use this all the time for almost all of my drawings, but mostly for hair. I feel like it's very important because you start off with a darker value and then your strokes just gradually lighten up. And so it's great, you can start filling in the lines where they are the darkest first, and then scratch your pencil up into the lightest value, and then you just end up with a natural looking gradient for the hair. And so now I'm doing the stray hairs, and they're very important because they help make the whole thing look more realistic. And my main thing with them is that you have to start with the same direction that the group of hair closest to it is going, but then it separates itself gradually, and then just as gradually it goes back to the main strands. I just feel like these kinds of stray hairs serve their purpose, and they look more planned and not just messy. So now we're moving on to wavy and curly territory. There's two ways that I do them. The first one is the S shape. The second one coils around a tube. So the first one is a little bit easier. You just start with an extended S and then go smaller as you go down. And then I do another one, but this time the S shape looks more severe so that it curves out more before it comes back in again. This part where it curves out, you really want to exaggerate that. That's why on the next steps, I am adding more lines where it curves out, just so it looks really nice and full. And I also like how it looks like the hair flows this way. So for this next one, the hair is coiling onto itself, but to make it easier to imagine, I start by drawing it around a tube, and like the last one, the tube should be getting smaller as it gets longer. And so you have a strand that's wrapping itself around the tube before it stops completely around it and then reappears again on the other side. When you're shading, just remember that the one behind is darker because it's falling under the shadow of the one above. And also on the S-shape one, I also like to focus the shading on the parts where the strands meet than on the wider parts. So let's just go ahead and apply those to the top, to type 2 hair, which is wavy hair. Wavy hair has soft waves but not defined enough to really be considered curly. People say to use the S wave for this one, but I actually think it's a combination of both. I think it's also the coil waves, but just very loosely wrapping around the tube. So I want to start with the tube curls. I want to show you guys how it can also look like it's wavy. Then the hair starts to twist around itself, and then it just ends in the S wave where it gently just falls down. Also, when you're doing wavy hair, make sure to keep those waves away from the roots because they don't usually start waving from the start up. We only really need to do a couple of these defined waves because the rest we can just do as these random waves before we can start shading. So you can see that I'm shading them in a way that defines all those waves just so the highlight also forms its own waves. So now we can start filling these up with the strands, and again we're using the same strokes as the last time. That's the same as when we make check marks, but this time we are following the lines that are set before. So now we're doing the third hair type, which is curly hair, and curly hair has more defined curls than wavy hair, and also it has more height near the roots. This one I think is 3A, which is defined to be curly on top, but the curls are still very big and loose. So again, we are doing the general shape of the hair first before starting to shade in the shadows. Doing the same combination as the last time, where we start with a tube coil and then end in an S pattern. Only this time we're drawing the curls a lot tighter and we're drawing those big strands together. So you can see by doing the shadows, we can actually define those curls even more by just carving out the shadows under them and then by darkening up where they meet. So now we are doing the stray hairs, and I'm doing them again by starting them out in the same general direction that the main strand is going and then have it start to drift off, only to join the main pack again where they meet. The fourth and last hair type has coils really tightly packed together and close to the head. This one is 4A, and 4A has a very visible curl pattern with spirals. And again, I'm starting it by doing the general shape of the hair first, but then because you can still see the form together, I draw big tubes that spill out from the scalp. And then I am shading it all in, and actually advise shading it in first before you map out the tube-like shapes for the strands, just so that it's easier to see. And type 4 hair has very tight curls, so the way I draw them is I start with the spirals and then end in tight waves. And I'm looking at my drawing now, I think I may have made my curls too big. That's because my drawing is small. I think actual 4A hair might be tighter than this. So now we're following those lines that we've mapped out earlier, and there really are no shortcuts to this. You really have to draw as many of them as you can because 4A has those patterns visible, unlike 4C. So the way that I vary the values in the curls is by drawing more of those strands where the hair is supposed to be darker, and also using lighter strokes for the lighter areas. So for this very last one, we're doing 4C hair, which I think is very different from 4A because 4C hair has ends that clump together more than 4A and B, and it's also more prone to shrinkage. So 4C hair, there's really usually no visible hair pattern because they're just so packed together. So the way I draw them is to again do the initial shape first and already start shading, because getting those values right is so important on this type of hair because there's not a lot of pattern to work with, so you really have to make sure you are getting that one right on this hair type. So you can see I am shading it in circles to mimic how the curls are tightly packed together, and I'm also making sure that the ends aren't that much different from the rest of the head. And again, to build up the shadows on the dark hair areas, I just repeat what I've been doing for the rest of the hair, so I can really make sure that I'm drawing as much of it as I can. So then when I've filled up the general area as much as I need to, I take the tip of my pencil and make some stray hair, and I'm mostly just focusing them on the edges, unlike on the other hair types. I'm keeping them mostly with the rest of the head, and I don't want to overdo any stray hair because a lot of the time they're very hard to see. They don't really just stand out like with the rest of the other hair types. So now we are going on to some of the more popular hairstyles, and I'm starting off with short hair. Curly or wavy hair cut short just flies everywhere, but you still need to maintain the pattern from where it grew out from the scalp like before. And then the pattern of the hair is also the same as or coil shape, only this time it's cut much shorter and the waves taper down much faster. Straight hair, the direction where they grow is much clearer when it's cut short than when it's longer. It's because when they're shorter, they're less affected by gravity, and you see some pointing straight ahead and some go down and some even point straight up. For this one, we are doing locks on 4C hair. And we start off by using the same tubes that spill out from the scalp, similar to how we started with 4A hair. And then we are shading these by locks, so they aren't all just one shade. And we are doing the same patterns with our pencils as we did with 4C hair normally. So we are doing those tight circles and then repeat the edges to build up the shadows. So for this last one, I want to do a shout out to braids, because to this day they're still so hard for me to do. And I finally found a tutorial that makes sense, and this one is from Kaja on Pinterest. So we start off with dividing the main shape into 4 lines and have one line going down from the side to the end of the 3rd line from where that one starts. And then we'll have another line from the opposite direction, stopping again to the 3rd line where that one starts, and then we just go on repeat. And then we can start connecting those lines with very curved sides. The more extreme you make your curves on this one, the looser your braids are gonna look. Then we just shade the same way as the wavy hair. We're focusing the shading or the lines where all of these strands meet, because that's where the hair is more concentrated and that's where the shadows normally lie. So yeah, that is it for everything that I have learned from doing hair. I really hope this video helped you guys. Thank you for making it to the end, and I'll see you guys soon.